I'm 28 and this was 2 years ago. It was just a few days before Christmas, but I had taken the entire week off from my freelance graphic design work. Since I worked for myself, I could essentially schedule when I'd actually sit down to draw, and I'd managed to clear my queue enough to work from home this whole week. I knew there was a big winter storm hitting the mountains around this week, and with the holiday and everything, I just wanted to stay home and have some more chill creative days. My clients navigated remote work by basically just saying they needed the proofs by the deadline. And aside from that, it was up to me how I wanted to go about it. There were a few more guidelines, but this meant I could really work whatever schedule I wanted. I always preferred sleeping in and drawing late into the night. This day, I started sketching around noon. The first several hours were slow and calm, I guess. I sipped on my tea and tried to get some designs done. Over the course of those hours, the wind got increasingly heavier, slamming into the glass sliding door next to me, and snow slowly began coming down. By 3 o'clock or 4, it was already dark outside due to the heavy clouds overhead and all the snow flooding on top of the valley. I was going to go out to grab groceries, but with the roads being the way they were, I decided to stay in for the rest of the night. I worked at my drafting table for another couple of hours. The sun had set and the winter storm had come in at full force. I left the blinds up so I could watch the snowfall from my desk, but out of nowhere, a small flame flickered outside. I looked over and saw a tiny orange glow appearing and disappearing. It was for sure a lighter being flicked on and off. I leaned back from my desk and looked at the window for maybe 10 seconds, watching the small flame pop up outside the window before getting curious enough to get up and walk over to the window to see what was going on. I mean, it had to be freezing cold. Why was anyone out there? I peered outside the window, trying to look down the side of my cabin. I spotted the spark, but before I could trace it back to whoever was holding it, it stopped. Or maybe the wind blew it out. I couldn't tell. It was too dark and the snow blocked pretty much my whole view. With nothing else to see, I sat back down. Honestly, I think I assumed some hiker might have gotten lost on the trail behind my place or was just looking for a trail marker. I didn't worry much and tried to focus back on my work while the storm continued outside. Over the next 2-ish hours, the cabin constantly creaked and settled. But several times, I thought I'd heard something slightly louder and more distinct, enough so for me to stop and look away from my desk, hoping to hear it again and figure out what it was. I didn't. But how could it not be the wood just making noises? The thought that it was anything else seemed really far-fetched. That was until there was a much louder crack sound. It sounded more like wood splintering than just a hit against the wall, let alone the house settling in the wind, and it sounded like it was inside the mudroom. I got up from my desk and walked into the hallway, hearing nothing and then moving downstairs. Everything looked and sounded normal. Not that I could hear too much over the heavy winds, but there weren't any more loud cracks. Honestly, I wasn't scared enough to do a full-on search through every section of the house, not without any other noises or anything. So, I started to head back up to my studio, making it nearly to the top of the steps when suddenly there was a buzz sound and the whole house went dark. The power cut out. I froze in place for a second. The entire cabin was pitch black. With the snowstorm outside, no light was even coming in through the windows. I couldn't even see my own hands in front of my face. I thought the storm had to have messed with the power or maybe a branch hit the line. I began slowly moving back down the stairs, feeling for every step as I carefully and blindly made my way down to the lower hallway. The utility closet which led to the breaker box was at the far end of this hallway. So, I started following the wall, tracing my hand against it to keep myself going the right way. When I started to hear something, I stopped walking. It was something moving, sort of heavy breathing, and from behind the utility door, it got closer and closer until suddenly there was the quiet squeak of the utility door opening. I could feel my eyes get wider as I stared down the darkness-filled hallway. I took one step back and quietly slipped through the open guest bedroom door that was right next to me. I still couldn't see, and I felt like closing the door would give me away, so I left it open. Slow, heavy footsteps began walking down the hallway. I was holding my breath, trying not to make a sound. The footsteps came closer and closer until I felt they were just outside the bedroom I was in. Then the footsteps passed right by the open doorway. I never even saw them walking just 2 or 3 feet from me. That's how incredibly dark it was. The footsteps continued to slowly move through the hallway until they reached the stairs. And from then on, it was a rug, so I couldn't hear anything at all. Suddenly, the sound of the snowstorm outside took over my hearing again, almost feeling amplified by the emptiness inside the home. The person could have stopped walking and still been standing right at the bottom of the stairs, but I took the chance that they most likely continued upstairs, and I decided to make a run for it. I left the bedroom and blindly moved to the other side of the home, sticking my hands out to try not to slam into a wall. I made it to the side entry, grabbed my keys, and left out the door to get into my SUV in the driveway. I drove away and used the SOS device in my car to get in contact with the police. No surprise, the person was gone when they got there. From what the cops could find, after prying the mudroom door and turning off the power, whoever it was had essentially went straight upstairs and into the studio, then to the master bedroom and nowhere else, which meant this person was definitely there looking for me. What's really unsettling is the person most likely knew me and knew the layout of my cabin enough to walk perfectly straight through it in the dark and to go straight upstairs to my studio where they knew I'd be. Could have even been someone I collaborated with online that I had no idea had horrible intentions. It made me question everything. I moved away having paranoia about essentially every client or artist friend that I wasn't super close with. Since moving, I haven't had anything happen. Hopefully, I don't ever have any updates to give, but if something else happens, I'll let you know. I'd been driving since early morning trying to make it from Seattle to my brother's place in Idaho before the weekend. It was supposed to be a quick winter trip. Just me, my old but trusty pickup truck, and some lukewarm thermos coffee. Everything was fine until the freezing rain started falling once I got a little further east and into the more isolated parts of the pass. It wasn't too bad to start, just some sleet here and there, but it ramped up pretty quick around the time the sun went down. It became almost a sheet of ice that even my high beams were having trouble cutting through. After an hour of this, the road was fully covered in black ice to the point where it was really hard to tell if I was even staying in the lane. With how stressful it was, I told myself I'd pull off at whatever the next place was, so I could wait out the ice storm. Once I decided that, I think it was 15 minutes later that I barely saw a light on the side of the road. It was raining so hard I couldn't even read what it was before turning in. The parking lot was icy but had 3 cars in it. One noticeably covered in frost and the other 2 looked like they'd pulled in not long before me. I parked, and from there I could see from the shape and look of the building that it was a 24-hour laundromat with a vending area. I was hoping for a motel, but figured if I was going to be stuck waiting here anyway, I might as well head in and get out of the cold. I got out and walked through the freezing rain. I hurried inside, nearly slipping twice already. This definitely wasn't the kind of place I was used to or ever been to before being a city person, so I felt very out of place. It was a very sterile, fluorescent-lit room with rows of washers. 2 men were sitting on a bench near the vending machines, and 1 woman was folding clothes at a table. When I opened the door, though, it was very quiet inside. None of them were talking or anything. However, they all looked over at me and greeted me right away. Felt like I walked in during an awkward silence or something. I thought I was just overthinking it, though. I sat on a plastic chair near the men. Turned out both the guys had the same idea as me, pulling in to escape the ice. I bought a soda from the machine and took the bottle over to a seat by the front glass, watching the rain continue coming down outside and coating our cars. I also had a weird feeling about one of the men over at the bench. He was younger, maybe 30, but the best way I could describe him is that he looked incredibly jittery. I don't know if it was from the cold or anxiety or if he was just on something. Strangely, after I left and sat at the window, all the conversation stopped again, and the place was quiet, just like it had been when I first walked in. We all sort of sat there in silence for a few minutes before suddenly one of the men got up and said something about trying to reach his house in the valley before the pass got closed. Nobody else said anything. I watched him through the window, sliding out to his car and getting in. He sat inside there for a minute, probably waiting for the defrost. Then the jittery guy also got up and, without saying anything, left the laundromat. I moved from the window back to the folding table, immediately asking the woman what was up with those guys. She shrugged, saying they pulled in around the same time and looked like they were shouting in the parking lot before coming inside. From there, they didn't say much of anything. Figured it was just road rage or something like that. I stayed at the table for a while talking to her about the storm and just a bunch of small talk. Over those 30 minutes, nobody else walked into the laundromat. Eventually, I made my way back to the window to check on the ice and see if it had let up a bit. That's when I saw both of the men's cars still there. However, neither of them were inside the cars or outside the cars. They were just gone. This immediately sent a chill through me because it had been a while since they left the building. No way they were out in the freezing rain for that long. I went over to the front door for a closer look, then decided to take a few steps out and look around. The sharp sting of ice instantly hit my face, and the rain, while not as heavy as before, still made it difficult to see. Aside from the wind, it was quiet out there. No signs of either of the men. It actually gave me a really uneasy feeling to the point where I wanted to leave. I slid my feet across the ice to my truck. Plan was to turn it on and let it warm up while I waited back inside before leaving. But it wouldn't start. Not like it was struggling to start, though. It wouldn't even turn on in the slightest or make any sounds when I turned the key. It had only been maybe 40 minutes since I'd arrived at the laundromat, and my truck hadn't had a single issue before this night. My gut knew one of the men had something to do with this. I know maybe at this point that sounds crazy, like I was being over-skeptical from the jump, but I just knew it somehow. And then, as I sat in the seat, still trying to get it to turn on, I saw someone, the jittery man, walking out of the tree line behind the building. He wasn't much more than a dark figure covered by the darkness and the sleet, but he was heading back toward the cars. I quickly got out and rushed inside, turning the lock on the front door. The woman asked me why I did that and what was going on, to which I quickly explained and told her to call 911. She seemed unsure but did it anyway. A minute later, the man showed up at the door. He tried to walk in, pressing on the door. When he realized it was locked, he made eye contact with me through the glass and banged on the door. His eyes were wide and his face was wet, but he still had that jittery look. Through our eye contact and the door being locked, I think he knew that I was on to him or whatever the hell it was that was going on. He didn't stay more than 10 seconds before running to his car. When the cops made it, only 3 cars were in the parking lot. Mine, the woman's, and the other man's. The creepy guy made it out. Unfortunately, this night didn't end on the typical he got away before anything happened. The officers followed some faint tracks in the ice into the woods behind the laundromat and found the body of the other guy. None of his things were missing, though. It looked like it was just an act of violence. And just as disturbing, his car wouldn't start either. They found that it had the exact same issue that my car had, which was the battery cables being deliberately cut. So, with all that info found out, the story pretty much told itself. When both men pulled in that night, at some point, the creepy guy cut the line to prevent him from leaving. Then he just waited for him to head back outside, where he then followed him out. And of course, with the car not turning on and there being no escape, He was either dragged into the woods or had tried running away. Regardless, it all ended the same. And with the heavy noise of the ice storm, me and the woman inside had no clue any of it was going on, just 20 foot outside the front doors. But at some point during the 30 minutes before I noticed anything, the man had also cut the line on my truck, which likely means he had the same plans for me that night. I was able to make it safely to my brother's place, but aside from a few phone calls to check in on me, I never heard anything about the man being found. Don't think I'll be going on any road trips around winter again, though. And thinking about the image of that man walking out of the woods through the freezing rain toward me, now knowing what he truly intended, still gets my heart racing. This was around Christmas time last year. I think between Christmas and New Year's. I was back in my hometown for winter break from university, but I still had bills and stuff. So when I wasn't busy with family, I did some grocery delivery driving. It was snowing this night, but not enough to pack the roads to the point it was dangerous to drive. But it was enough for most people to not want to leave their houses to get supplies. So nights like these were great for making decent money. Orders were going fine up until 10 o'clock. Things slowed down, but I was still getting consistent deliveries. This one was just like any other, except maybe slightly further than usual. 20 minutes away. My hometown was small but spread out, so lots of places were scattered on the outskirts near the lake. However, when I pulled up to where I was supposed to deliver this order, I was a bit unsure about it. The directions had led me off the main road and onto a private dirt lane, eventually to a spot where it looked like there was supposed to be a long driveway going deep into the trees, but it was completely snowed in. Nobody had plowed or shoveled it, and I couldn't even see any lights, like porch or outdoor lights in the forest. I stayed in my car and called the customer thinking there might have been something wrong with the address. He answered right away. The man sounded like he was mid-40s and very monotone, with that flat, emotionless voice. I said I was at the spot on the map he had marked to drop the groceries off at, but that I didn't see an open driveway or house or anything. The guy said it was probably covered in snow. The way he said it was like it should have been obvious. I responded saying I think I see where the driveway is supposed to be, but that I wasn't comfortable driving my car through it. He then gave some snarky answer about this was why he ordered delivery, and if I wasn't going to deliver it, then what the hell was the point? I didn't totally agree with that, and it seemed like a really douchey response. But in the moment, I guess I just folded and said, okay. I didn't want him to cancel the order or give me a negative review, especially not after I'd already driven all the way out here. Looking back, I've checked all the rules and stuff, and now I know that if I don't have access to the driveway or delivery location, then that's on the customer. At the time, I wasn't sure. So after he hung up, I got out with the bags, locked my car, and started walking through the snow. It wasn't super deep, but with it being on a less maintained dirt driveway, I think my car would have had a lot of trouble and probably gotten stuck. And it was really hard to tell where the actual path was. I mostly just tried to follow what I thought was a gap in the branches, but with no lights around to guide me, I didn't really know where I was walking. I kept looking back behind me at my car, seeing it get further and further away. It was my only sense of distance I had because up ahead it was really dark and I couldn't tell where I was going. It all just looked like the same forest. And all of a sudden, there was a sound to my left, a distinct metallic click that sounded eerily similar to a buckle or a latch snapping shut, but it was far, like just barely in reach of my hearing. I looked out there and even tried turning my phone light on, but it did absolutely nothing. I didn't see anything and didn't hear anything else. So I kept walking. The cold started getting to me and the endless darkness ahead had me rethinking everything. I figured by this point I would have seen the house or something at least to tell me I was going the right way. I stopped in place and stood there for a second, just having a moment of realization that this was all really odd. I looked around and I know it sounds stupid, but it took until then for me to think that there might actually not be a house here. Like this was all just some sort of weird trick to get me out here, which was absolutely terrifying to think about. Standing there alone in the snowy, dark forest. I took my phone out and decided if the customer didn't answer or tried again to convince me to keep walking, then I'd leave and cancel the order. I pressed call and held the phone up to my ear as I listened to it ring. It rang twice before I saw something in the corner of my eye. I turned my head, seeing a red light far out in the trees. Then it suddenly shut off, and a half-second later, the call dropped. I didn't even bother waiting or trying to think anything through. I immediately started sprinting back the way I came. The crunching snow beneath me covered whatever sounds could have been coming from behind me, like if the guy was chasing me or not. Probably made it even more terrifying. Not knowing what was behind me, I ran all the way to my car, and before I even made it up to the door, I saw something was wrong. It was shimmering in a weird way, which led my eyes to the windshield being completely smashed in. He had destroyed it. I got in and started it anyway, driving out of there with the cold air rushing in. I called the police on my way out, but aside from some questioning, they were kind of useless and really didn't seem to take the whole thing that seriously. To me, I think it's pretty clear that the guy was leading me out into the woods for a reason, and even went as far as to smash the windshield on my car to either keep me there or keep me from seeing while driving. I don't know what I would have found had I kept walking into those woods or what would have happened.